Before we begin, don't forget to hit subscribe for more true crime stories that expose the shocking secrets hiding behind suburban doors. The manicured lawns of Pine Hill looked untouched by scandal. Rows of identical mailboxes, symmetrical hedges, and pastel doors gleaming in the late spring sun. But behind the neat facades, the Grant and Sanders families lived lives far more complicated than their neighbors could ever imagine. Melissa Grant glanced out the window of her kitchen, watching her husband Tom fire up the grill on their deck. Next door, Rachel Sanders leaned over a flower bed, laughing as she teased her husband Eric about his gardening skills. Melissa and Rachel had become close, bonding over book clubs, yoga, and the shared fatigue of parenting in a town that demanded perfection. Their friendship blurred into double dates, wine-soaked game nights, and private confessions made in whispers on the back porch. Tom Grant worked as a financial consultant, confident and charming, always the life of any neighborhood party. He loved risk in his portfolio and, as Melissa had come to realize, maybe just as much in his personal life. They had an easy marriage. At least, that's what everyone thought. The truth was more fragile. Passion had faded. The routine of small kids, long hours, and spotless kitchens left Melissa feeling invisible. Tom noticed. He missed the thrill and unpredictability they'd once shared. The Sanders household was different, a little colder, a little quieter. Rachel, glamorous with her auburn hair and mischievous smile, craved excitement. She'd married Eric for his steadiness, but grew restless with his silence. Eric, an IT specialist, spent his evenings tinkering with home automation or retreating to his basement office. He loved Rachel deeply, but sensed her discontent. The way she talked about spicing things up, the longing glances she sometimes cast toward Tom. Everything changed one Friday night in June. The Grants and Sanders were sharing a bottle of wine on the Grants' patio. The conversation drifting from work stress to fantasy vacations to, eventually, bedroom secrets. Rachel, emboldened by alcohol and the safe glow of friendship, blurted a joke about wife swapping, provoking laughter and mock outrage. But underneath the laughter, something dangerous flickered. Tom grinned, playing along. Well, if it ever comes to that, lady's choice. Just don't swap me for someone who can't grill. Melissa felt a jolt of excitement she hadn't in years. Rachel's eyes met hers and held, a challenge sparking between them. A week later, after a night out at the local bistro, the four found themselves back at the Sanders house, another round of drinks in hand. The air was thick with something Melissa couldn't name. Anticipation, maybe, or the possibility of crossing a line none of them could uncross. Jokes turned into dares, and before anyone could reverse course, Tom and Rachel slipped upstairs together, while Eric and Melissa remained in the kitchen, silent but complicit. It was supposed to be a game, a fantasy fulfilled in the safety of trust. But the aftershocks hit fast. Melissa and Eric listened to the faint sounds above, the groan of bed springs, muffled laughter, a door closing. Melissa felt her pulse race, a sick mixture of jealousy and guilt. Eric stared at his whiskey, hands trembling. When Tom and Rachel reappeared, faces flushed, clothes slightly askew, no one mentioned what happened. They all pretended nothing had changed. Except everything had. The day after, Melissa found Rachel on her porch, eyes red-rimmed, voice brittle. It was just supposed to be fun. Eric won't talk to me. He barely looks at me. Melissa tried to comfort her friend, but inside felt her own marriage shake. Tom, for his part, seemed invigorated, more attentive than he'd been in years. But there was a distance in his touch now, his kisses hurried and distracted. Eric withdrew further. Nights, he'd drive for hours or disappear into his basement office. Melissa worried he was blaming her, or worse, planning to leave. Rachel grew erratic, calling Melissa at odd hours, obsessing over Tom's texts, hinting at meeting him again. He understands me in a way Eric never did, she said one night, voice slurred. Does that make me a bad wife? Rumors started churning in Pine Hill. Neighbors noticed Melissa's drawn face, Eric's erratic schedule. Someone had seen Tom's car parked outside the Sanders house after midnight. At book club, whispers darted through the circle. Harmless suburbia gossip, until Rachel was found dead in her own kitchen one stormy night. Melissa, summoned by frantic texts, arrived first, trailing the scent of rain through the open back door. Rachel's body lay sprawled across the tile, the broken pieces of a wine glass glittering like tears by her hand. Her phone buzzed with unread messages. Eric was gone, his car missing. Tom, unreachable. The police arrived quickly, cordoning off the Sanders home. The news spread in hours. Rachel Sanders, beloved neighbor and friend, dead at 35, in a home filled with secrets. As detectives swarmed Pine Hill, peeling back the layers of each marriage, Melissa's world began to unravel. She realized too late that what started as a fantasy had awakened something much darker. A secret obsession that would claim more than just Rachel's life. The days after Rachel's death passed in a blur of police interviews, hushed conversations, and restless, sleepless nights. Pine Hill, usually a village of idle gossip and garden parties, was suddenly awash in suspicion. Nearly every neighbor had their own theory, but the tight knot at the heart of the story, Melissa, Tom, and Eric, was the focus of every glance, every whisper. Melissa barely ate. She replayed their last real conversation with Rachel 100 times, trying to unpick what she'd missed. She remembered Rachel's restless energy, her cryptic half-jokes, the messages at odd hours. She remembered the wine-soaked Friday, the looks that lingered too long, and the tensions that grew after the night of the swap. The police questioned her again and again. Did Rachel seem afraid of anyone? Had she argued with Eric? How often did you see Tom at the Sanders house? The detectives Harris and Lou, were relentless but careful. They sensed the fractures in the story. Melissa told them everything she could about Rachel's moods, about Eric's withdrawal, about Tom's sudden intensity. She left out the details about the text messages Rachel had sent to Tom late at night. She left out the guilt that made her skin crawl. Eric still hadn't been found. The night Rachel died, security cameras on a neighbor's house showed his SUV speeding away. His phone pinged a cell tower 20 miles outside town and then went dark. Tom insisted he didn't know where Eric was. He's probably just running away from everything, Tom said, but his voice sounded flat and rehearsed. Melissa's home felt emptier every day. Tom was constantly on his phone, fielding work calls and checking in with police, but never seemed fully present. She caught him more than once staring out the window into the dark. Their children were frightened and confused. Melissa tried to shield them, to keep the routine going, but every knock at the door made her jump. A week after the funeral, the toxicology report came back. Rachel had not only been drinking, but had sedatives in her system, enough to make her groggy but not enough to kill. The cause of death was a blow to the head with a marble bookend, a household object missing from the Sanders' living room. There were no signs of forced entry. The police pressed harder. Who had access to the house? Who knew about Rachel's medications? The shift in questioning rattled Melissa. She began to feel, for the first time, that the police were looking at her and Tom as suspects, not just grieving friends. Late one night, unable to sleep, Melissa wandered into Tom's home office. His laptop was open, email glowing. She froze when she saw a message from Rachel, dated 2 days before her death. I can't keep pretending, Tom. I think Eric's suspects. What are we going to do? Underneath, it was Tom's reply. Just stay calm. I'll handle Eric. We can figure this out. Melissa sat down hard. She stared at the words, her pulse roaring in her ears. Had Tom lied to her? Had he kept in touch with Rachel after promising to end things? What did he mean by handle Eric? A sudden noise made her jump. Tom stood in the doorway, shadowed and unreadable. His eyes darted from a screen to her face. It's not what you think, he said quietly. Melissa's arms wrapped around herself, trembling. Then what is it, Tom? What did you promise her? Tom rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. Rachel was threatening to tell Eric everything. She said she was going to leave him. She wanted us to be together. She was obsessed, Melissa. I tried to back off, but she wouldn't let me. Melissa's breath caught. The fantasy, the night she'd thought was just a game, had turned into a trap. Did you kill her? She whispered, unsure if she even wanted the answer. Tom stepped back, shaking his head. "No, I swear. I was home with you that night. Check the cameras. Ask the kids. I didn't touch her." The next day, police found Eric Sanders in a motel room 25 miles from Pine Hill. He was alive but barely coherent, an empty bottle of pills by the bed. When he woke, he said nothing, refusing to answer questions about Rachel, about Tom, about anything that had happened that last fatal week. They found his car parked outside Rachel's favorite hiking trail, mud caked on the wheels. The news spun out of control. Town blogs screamed headlines. "Wife swap murder mystery. Deadly love, Triangle rocks Pine Hill." Reporters descended, neighbors stopped speaking, and every driveway felt like a stage. Melissa was left with only questions. If not Tom, then Eric? If not Eric, then who had wanted Rachel dead badly enough to kill her in her own home? And why did the pieces of her marriage and herself feel less solid every day? The detectives circled back to the Grant house with a new theory. Rachel's death had nothing to do with what happened in the bedroom that night, but everything to do with obsession, betrayal, and old secrets. They just had to figure out whose. Detectives Harris and Lou returned to the Sanders house armed with new search warrants, their patience worn thin after days of evasive answers and community stonewalling. The local rumor mill was on fire, each family in Pine Hill imagining themselves in the spotlight, most grateful that for once, it wasn't their secrets on display. Melissa Grant watched the police cars roll past her kitchen window with a mix of dread and desperate curiosity. The sense that her own life was unraveling, thread by thread, grew heavier by the hour. Police finally managed to interview Eric Sanders in his hospital room after he regained enough strength to speak. The man barely resembled the silent neighbor Melissa thought she knew. He looked haunted, face gaunt, eyes rimmed with red. Detective Harris began gently. "Eric, we need to understand what happened the night Rachel died. Can you help us?" Eric said nothing for several moments, hands twisting the bedsheet. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "She kept saying she wanted out. She said things would be better for all of us if everything came to light." He hesitated, then quietly added, "But some things should stay buried." Detectives pressed. "Did you and Rachel argue that night? Did you see Tom or Melissa?" Eric closed his eyes, silent. They switched tactics, mentioning the sedatives in Rachel's system, the missing bookend. That detail made Eric's hands go rigid. I didn't touch her," he said, "but I wish I could forget that night." His lawyer cut the interview short. Meanwhile, forensic results came back. The blood on the bookend matched Rachel's, but latent prints were smudged, unreadable except for a partial belonging to Rachel and what looked like a small fragment from someone with a long, narrow thumb. Not enough for a match. The toxicologist found traces of a rare anti-anxiety medication, one prescribed not to Rachel, but to Melissa some months ago. Detectives visited her again, asking why her prescription was found in Rachel's system. Melissa's answers were shaky, defensive. She sometimes asked for one when she couldn't sleep. It wasn't often. I never thought. The theory that the case could be a murder-suicide or a staged accident began to swirl through the investigation. But the physical evidence didn't match. A struggle, defensive wounds on Rachel's wrists, the strange pattern of blood on the countertop. The story was off. In the midst of mounting pressure, Tom Grant began acting even more erratic. He became short with the kids, angry at small inconveniences, pacing the house as if waiting for something or someone to turn up. That Friday, a plain manila envelope arrived at the Grant home, addressed to Melissa in messy, block letters. Inside were copies of text messages, Rachel pleading for Tom to leave Melissa, Tom alternating between affection and coldness, Rachel begging Tom to meet her alone the night she died. At the bottom, a typed note. "Ask your husband the truth about where he was that night." Melissa felt sick. Her mind raced back to that night. Tom had come home late, but claimed he'd been at work catching up on quarterly reports. He'd kissed her forehead, showered, and gone straight to bed. She remembered the way he'd avoided her eyes, the faint smell of gin on his breath. Now doubt, gnawing and relentless, crept in. Had Tom gone to see Rachel? After all, unable to sit with her suspicions, Melissa confronted Tom in their bedroom, envelope clutched in her shaking fist. He tried to deny it at first, then, under pressure, relented. Rachel texted me that night, he admitted. She was desperate, crying, saying she couldn't take it anymore, that Eric was following her, that she felt trapped. I drove by the house, but I didn't go in. I promise, Mel. I just wanted to see if she was okay. Melissa's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell the police? Why lie to me? Tom's jaw tightened, eyes glassy. I knew how it'd look, and I was afraid they'd blame me, or worse, think you had a reason to want her gone. The truth, or at least a version of it, hung between them like fog. With the arrival of the envelope, the killer was watching Melissa, watching Tom, maybe even the whole town. The police redoubled their efforts, interviewing every neighbor, every friend, piecing together a timeline littered with jealousy, resentment, and broken trust. That Sunday, a new twist. Security footage surfaced from a traffic camera a block from the Sanders house, timestamped 40 minutes before Rachel's time of death. It showed a figure hastily walking toward the front door, someone wearing a hoodie, head down, hands in pockets. The build matched neither Tom nor Eric exactly, but something about the walk looked familiar to Melissa. Fast, anxious, almost furtive. She couldn't sleep that night, haunted by the idea that someone she knew, someone they all knew, had been close enough to end it all. In the tight, suffocating world of Pine Hill, the question was no longer who had motive, or even who had the opportunity, but who had let their obsessions finally cross the line between fantasy and murder. The tension in Pine Hill grew so thick, neighbors started locking their doors in broad daylight, and parents hurried their children home before dark. Melissa felt the world closing in around her, every glance from across a fence or supermarket aisle laced with silent accusation. She began to sense the weight of suspicion not just from detectives, but from lifelong friends who once envied her picture-perfect life. Detectives Harris and Lou ramped up their investigation. They pored over the text exchanges between Tom and Rachel again and again, hoping for a hidden code or a promise that pointed to murder. Eric's alibi never fully convinced them. The partial print on the bookend led nowhere, and the prescription pills raised as many questions as they answered. Still, the story of a wife swap gone wrong was too sensational to ignore. The media frenzy only made matters worse. Local news vans lined up outside the Sanders house for days. People who had never met Rachel suddenly seemed to have opinions about what those kind of couples brought upon themselves. For Melissa, sleep came in fitful bursts. She started double-checking every lock before bed, jumping at the smallest sounds in the night. Tom had become emotionally distant, sometimes gentle to the point of desperation, other times irritable and volatile. She didn't know which was worse. The only person she longed to talk to was gone, her best friend's voice now a collection of screenshots and voicemails. One sleepless night, Melissa found herself scrolling through old group photos on her phone. Picnics, holidays, the four of them smiling in ways that now seemed impossibly naive. She paused on a stack of images from a barbecue weeks before the swap. There, in the background of shot, she noticed something odd. Eric and Rachel weren't talking, but rather standing several feet apart, both staring at the same person. Zooming in, Melissa's stomach dropped. It was Tom, caught in the middle of a burst of laughter. Rachel's gaze locked on him with an intensity Melissa hadn't seen at the time. Eric's face was unreadable, but his fists were clenched tightly at his sides. That same day, a package arrived at the Grant house. No return address. Inside, Melissa found a single object, the missing marble bookend, wiped clean but for a single bloodstain. There was a note, typed in block letters. Ask him about the basement. Melissa's heart thudded in her chest. The basement, Tom's man cave, off limits to everyone else. She waited until he had left for a walk, then fished out the spare key from his old desk. The stairs creaked as she descended, each step echoing like a warning. The room was tidy, almost obsessively so, but behind a false panel in Tom's storage cabinet, she found a shoebox. Inside, a burner phone, a stack of photos showing Tom and Rachel together on private drives, more printouts of their text exchanges, and a single, chilling photo. Rachel's body, as she had been found, but taken from a close, low angle, as if the photographer were kneeling right beside her. Melissa's breath caught. Why would Tom have a photo like this? She staggered back, nearly tripping over a loose board in the floor. Just then, she heard Tom's footsteps overhead. He was back. Melissa shoved the box in her bag and hurried upstairs, face pale. "Everything okay?" Tom asked, eyeing her nervously. She forced a smile, barely holding it together. That night, she barely slept, clutching her phone and the shoebox close, mind whirring with confusion, dread, and the icy certainty that she was in danger. The next morning, as Tom left for work, Melissa drove straight to the police station. She handed over the evidence without a word, letting the detectives piece together the story she was too afraid to finish. As she sat in that stark, gray interview room, the reality of her choices settled over her. The fantasy, the betrayal, and now the blood. The detectives called Tom in that afternoon. Under the harsh light of the interrogation room, the truth finally began to break. When shown the photos and the burner phone, Tom's facade cracked. He admitted to keeping the evidence, but insisted he hadn't killed Rachel. She threatened to destroy everything, Mel. She said she'd tell everyone, go to the press. She was out of control. But I swear, when I left her that night, she was alive. I just wanted her to stop. But the police, now armed with motive, opportunity, and the damning evidence, weren't convinced. As Tom broke down in tears, they pressed for more. Every detail, every secret he'd kept, every lie he told himself about how much control he had. He broke, admitting that he'd argued with Rachel, that things had gotten physical, but still denied that final, fatal blow. Outside the interview room, Melissa sat motionless, numb to the world. The line between fantasy and reality had vanished long ago. In Pine Hill, the truth didn't just unravel a marriage or a friendship. It left blood on the floor and no one untouched. As the interrogation dragged on, Tom Grant's defenses unraveled. Detective Harris led him, relentlessly, through every detail of that night. The texts, the argument, the secret rendezvous. Tom wept, his shoulders shaking under the weight of a year's worth of guilt and lies. "I hated what I'd become," he admitted, voice hoarse. "Rachel wanted more. She kept threatening to blow up my life. I never meant for any of this to happen. But I swear, when I left, she was alive." The police weren't entirely convinced. A forensics team swept the Sanders kitchen and living room again, this time with Tom's statements in mind. Under ultraviolet light, they detected the faint outline of a partial shoe print in blood, matching the rare Italian loafers Tom wore only on special occasions, like the night of the swap. It was another nail in his coffin. Melissa waited outside the interview room, her mind shattered by the discovery in the basement and Tom's confessions. She thought about Rachel's slow obsession, Tom's indifference growing into fear, Eric's quiet withdrawal. They had all played their parts in creating this disaster. But just as the prosecutor prepared to charge Tom with Rachel's murder, another piece of evidence surfaced. A security camera from a neighbor's back gate, time-stamped within minutes of Rachel's death. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Eric Sanders, fumbling with keys at his own back door, entering clutching a small duffel bag and not leaving for another hour. His face, drawn and wild-eyed, left little doubt he'd been in the house right as Rachel died. With this revelation, the entire case shifted. Detectives re-interviewed Eric. Pressed by the mounting evidence, Eric began to crack. Through tears, he recounted that final night. Rachel, desperate and drunk, had insisted she was leaving him, that Tom would protect her, that she had nothing to lose. Eric confronted her, pleading, then arguing, then, as the fight escalated, lashing out in a blind, furious panic. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. She pushed me too far. I'm sorry. His prints were retested against the fragment on the bookend. Under the pressure, Eric confessed to grabbing the weapon in a flash of anger. He had staged the scene, smeared Melissa's medication in a futile attempt to muddy the timeline, then fled the house in shock. The news rippled through Pine Hill faster than any police siren. In the final twist, the truth was stranger and messier than anyone imagined. The wife swap fantasy had stirred up every hidden insecurity and obsession in their carefully controlled lives, but it wasn't lust or a secret liaison that killed Rachel. It was a husband's heartbreak, a tipping point after years of feeling unseen and unloved. By the time the courts handed down Eric's sentence, the Grant's marriage was in ruins. Melissa sold the house and moved away, hoping to leave the scandal and her own regrets behind. Tom, acquitted of the charges but left publicly disgraced, quit his job and disappeared from Pine Hill social scene. The suburban dream, once so tightly woven, came apart thread by thread. In the end, the fantasy had become a nightmare, a cautionary tale whispered at garden parties and book clubs. In Pine Hill, what happens behind closed doors doesn't just stay hidden, it can destroy lives.